critical step towards ending the war in Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu says he supports a 20-point proposal put forward by the US president, which he says will ensure that Hamas will never again pose a threat to Israel. The deal would include an amnesty for members of the militant group who lay down their arms, but it's not clear whether it will be supported by Hamas. The plan has now been presented to the group, which is said to be reviewing it in good faith. Speaking at a joint press conference at the White House, Donald Trump said earlier that Israel would have the full backing of the United States to take steps to defeat Hamas if it doesn't accept the proposed deal.
I hope that we're going to have a deal for peace, and if Hamas rejects the deal, which is always possible, they're the only one left. Everyone else has accepted it. But I have a feeling that we're going to have a positive answer. But if not, as you know, Bibi, you'd have our full backing to do what you would have to do.
If Hamas agrees to your plan, Mr. President, the first step will be a modest withdrawal, followed by the release of all our hostages within 72 hours. The next step will be the establishment of an international body charged with fully disarming Hamas and demilitarizing Gaza. Now, if this international body succeeds, we will have permanently ended the war.
Well, for more, let's bring in former diplomat Nicholas Westcott, a professor at the Department of Politics and International Studies at the University of London. Nicholas, thanks so much for being with us on the programme. Donald Trump describing this as a historic day. Just how significant is this proposed deal being put forward by Donald Trump and agreed now by Benjamin Netanyahu?
As always with Donald Trump, there is a great deal of political theatre about this. He has pulled a rabbit out of the hat, it seems, in proposing a peace deal, which beyond very close means actually not quite there yet, because, as you just said, it requires agreement still from Hamas, who have not been directly involved in negotiating the peace plan. It's a 20-point peace plan. There's quite a lot of detail in there, but it's still very high-level principles. And there are several things in there that Hamas will find very difficult to stomach, but also things that the Israeli partners of Netanyahu in his government will find very difficult to stomach. So we wait to see whether Hamas decide it is worth the gains that they would get from this deal in return for signing up to it. But as we can hear, Netanyahu is still a little hesitant about it.
Well, the plan, it has now been presented to Hamas. It's said to be reviewing this proposal in good faith. How much pressure is the militant group going to be coming under here from mediators who are going to be encouraging it to accept this deal? Donald Trump, again, threatening that Israel will be allowed to move ahead at full force, essentially, if Hamas does not sign up to it.
I think Trump is demonstrating that he has put quite a lot of pressure on Netanyahu to sign up to a deal that he knows is unpopular with some of Netanyahu's government. But similarly, he will be expecting Hamas's backers, Qatar, Turkey, to put maximum pressure on them now to accept finally this kind of deal. The disarmament will be very unpopular with Hamas. The fact that Israel is not going to withdraw completely from the West Bank immediately, that they have to give up their hostages, all these will be quite difficult for Hamas to swallow. But where are they going to go to? Trump has also made quite clear that if they don't accept, then the war, the destruction of Gaza, the displacement of the people will just continue. So to some extent, this is being put forward as a last chance to cut a deal of some kind, which would lead to the creation of a state of Palestine. That's in the principles. Hamas, in principle, wants exactly that. Some of Netanyahu's allies are very firmly against it. But if they're smart, they'll accept the deal and put the ball back into the Israeli courts to say, right, now you've got to sign up to a Palestinian state.
And what kind of concessions do you think that Netanyahu was forced to make here? He really was, during that press conference, trying to present this as a victory for Israel and for his government, wasn't he?
Yes, and any successful peace deal is going to be a victory for all sides. But he knows it's a hard sell to his allies in the government, and so he has to put as positive a spin on it as possible. What's going to be difficult for them is that it does require a withdrawal from Gaza. It does commit to creating a Palestinian state. There's a bit of ambiguity over this, what the role of the Palestinian Authority will be, but also very unpopular will be the amnesty for remaining Hamas fighters, as long as they disarm. So it's not going to be an easy sell for Netanyahu with his government, but on the other hand, actually getting Hamas to disarm, getting them to hand over the hostages, and creating a demilitarized Gaza should be a big win for Israel. So there's a lot riding on this, and the outcome is still very uncertain.
And do you think ultimately, though, that his far-right, coalition partners are going to be forced to accept this deal? It's already been welcomed by the families of the hostages, for example, those remaining in Gaza.
I think the Bezalel, Smotrich and the Ben-Gvirs will do their utmost to undermine this deal and reject it, because it would prevent their objective of achieving complete annexation of the West Bank and the removal of all Palestinians from Gaza. But it's quite clear the international community will not accept that. And Trump has ultimately come down on the side of the international community, not the Smotriches. The question now, Netanyahu is squeezed between those two. Is he going to recognize that Israel is dependent on the US and force his allies, at the risk of breaking down his own government, to accept the deal? Or is he going to back off and cave in to keep himself in power once more with the alliance of these people, in which case that means standing up to the US? And that is now, their support is no longer to be taken for granted if Israel rejects this deal. But it puts the emphasis first on Hamas. Hamas, if they're smart, will accept it and throw the ball back at the Israelis. Then Netanyahu really does have to face down his government. If Hamas reject it, it gets Israel off the hook. And Netanyahu could say, well, you're not our fault, and he will stick with his coalition, and they will continue with their objective of trying to eliminate Palestine altogether.
And Nicholas, as for the detail of this plan, how different is it to the proposal that we were talking about a year and a half ago that was put forward under the Biden administration? Does it differ radically, or is it more or less the same proposal?
It is and it isn't. It is quite similar, but the situation is very different. Gaza is far more destroyed. There's very little now to preserve there. It's a tabula rasa, really. And in effect, it is asking Hamas to surrender. It's no longer leaving them in place. They would have to disarm. They would have to step out of the political field. They would get an amnesty, but effectively no further political role for them. So Hamas is in a worse place than it was a year ago. Israel is marginally better, but it's going to have to step back from where it wants to be. So I would say there is a better chance of this deal being accepted than the one a year ago, even though to some extent it's a worse deal for both sides. But that's what war does.
And Nicholas, in the last few minutes, we've heard from Tony Blair. He's hailing what he describes as a bold plan for Gaza. He will, of course, play a key role in all of this. What do you make of the former British Prime Minister's involvement in this plan?
It's very interesting that he is so much in the thick of it. He has always been very heavily engaged in the Middle East peace process. He was the spokesman, the coordinator for the quartet back in the day, and he's still there. The fact that he's involved with the Trump White House, I think, has helped make these proposals more realistic than they otherwise would be. But having a British former Prime Minister involved with the Board of Peace, implementing that, could be problematic. There's a lot of history involved here. Tony Blair has form in the Middle East. So it's probably a good thing, but it might not work out the best for him. Let's wait and see.
And does this plan kind of beg the question that Palestinians themselves might be actually sidelined? That was something that critics were worried about. And again, when we see the involvement of a former British Prime Minister, it does raise the question again. Donald Trump saying he'll be overseeing everything. Israel saying it's going to, retain security responsibility over Gaza.
Yes, the Palestinians have not been involved in negotiating these 20 principles. The Palestinian Authority nor Hamas have given any kind of signal of agreement. It's been sorted out just by Trump. But the Arab states that back Israel have been involved. And to some extent, Trump is looking to them, to Saudi Arabia, to Qatar, to Turkey, as I said, Egypt, to tell the Palestinians this is the best deal you're going to get, because they're absolutely on the back foot. Gaza is virtually destroyed. The West Bank is in the process of being taken over increasingly by settlers. There's a group that wants to annex it wholesale. If you like, this is the last chance for the Palestinians to actually achieve something approaching a state of their own. And if this is missed, it may never come back again.
And where does all of this, Nicholas, just finally leave the West Bank? As you say, far-right allies of Netanyahu urging him to fully annex it. Netanyahu himself just last week, not rowing back from that speculation, from those plans. So where does it stand now when it comes to the West Bank going forward?
And Palestinians have every reason to be extremely skeptical to this proposal, because effectively the settlers have been given a free rein, and Netanyahu himself went to the United Nations only last week to say there will never be a Palestinian state. So are they going to trust the US to actually back Palestine against Israel in allowing a state to be created? On the other hand, if they leave the status quo as it is and they don't accept the deal, then Israel has the power to continue its gradual annexation. International opinion is firmly against that, but they don't have any forces on the ground to stop it. So the Palestinians are not in a comfortable place at all. They will feel they've been sold down the river by Trump, but on the other hand, this is their one chance to get off and salvage something. And nobody else is going to come and fight physically for them against Israel. They have tried fighting themselves with the results that we've seen in Gaza. So their options are limited.
And we await a response from Hamas. Nicholas, thanks so much for being with us. That is Nicholas Westcott from the University of London. Do stay with us for more world news here on France 24.